Good morning, Courageous Church. We're so glad that you joined us today. I guess whether you're watching in the morning or the evening or midweek, whenever you're watching this, we're glad that you're part of our community. We want to encourage you. We have groups during the week. If you need community, send us a message. We'll help you get connected with a group that meets either digitally or in person. Help you get connected with others who are growing too. But you are welcome here wherever you're at in your faith journey. We're happy that you're with us. So we have been on a journey lately through the Old Testament. We're looking at the overall story of the Bible with Jesus at the center of it. And we're looking at how the story of Jesus and the need for him to come is interwoven, the promise that he's going to come, it's all interwoven through the entire Old Testament. And we're teaching about what the Old Testament says to help us understand better our Bible and our relationships with Jesus. So we started at the very beginning and we got all the way through the story up to last week. Tim talked about Joshua. So we've seen the nation of Israel established. We've seen them start living in their new land. And this last part that Tim covered left us off with a generation fully committing themselves to serve the Lord. Now, the part we're going to jump into today, there's been sermons here lately, there's been lessons here where we've sped through a lot of content really fast because we're just trying to see this overall picture. Today, we're going to pause a little. I said there'd be moments going through this series on the Old Testament where we pause and where we go a little deeper on a topic. And today is one of those. Today we're going to talk about the book of Judges. And last week was a really inspirational message. I mean, we got to talk about Joshua and that generation that was fully committed to the Lord. There's a lot of excitement in there. This is not an easy message to teach or to hear or to accept. Today is challenging. But before we jump into it, here's a lighter question. Who has a preschooler in your life? Whether that's your own preschooler, whether that's like a niece or a nephew, the child of a friend that you see often. If you have a good amount of familiarity with preschoolers, or if you had preschoolers that are now older, how many of you have preschoolers? Like or comment, let us know. Most of us probably know a preschooler. Now, I have a preschooler, and one thing about preschoolers usually is that they love sugar. They love candy. And while they can be taught to eat healthy food, and many of them do like healthy kinds of food, most preschoolers, if you offer them a lollipop or cotton candy, you're gonna see their whole face light up and get excited, and they don't have much of a filter to be like, this is probably when I should stop eating sugar. Usually it has to be the role of a parent to show them what health looks like, to put healthy boundaries around them. But sometimes boundaries can feel restrictive. I mean, boundaries protect what's valuable, right? Our children's health are valuable, so we put boundaries around the amount of sugar they can have. But sometimes boundaries feel restrictive, and preschoolers would love to break free of them and eat all the candy they want. And sometimes that tension can cause tantrums. Boundaries don't always feel fun, even if they're designed to protect us, right? So for my preschooler, until she can learn to make healthy choices, I will be telling her how much sugar she can and can't eat. But what would happen if a child got to choose for themselves what seemed right in their own eyes? If you had broccoli and cotton candy sitting on the table and they always got to choose which one they would want, what are the chances that child is going to end up super healthy? So the chances aren't great, right? So at the end of the book of Joshua at the end of his life told, in chapter 23 of Joshua, he told the Israelites, make sure you finish driving out the people who were worshiping false gods. Make sure you finish driving them out of the land and don't take on their customs or make treaties with them. You need to serve the Lord alone. And it ends the book with the people saying, yes, we will serve the Lord alone. But we see right at the beginning of Judges that the people haven't kept their word. Instead, they've made lots of treaties with the nations around them. They didn't follow through with removing like the sin in the nation. Remember, the sin had gotten so bad in the nation that God was going to remove the sin like from that part of the world where he was establishing this new nation that would be following him. And part of that was like things had gotten so bad and so just evil in the way they were worshiping idols that God was saying like, no, like there's a limit to how much evil I will allow. And it wasn't about an ethnic cleansing, to be clear. It was about, because there's people from all different ethnicities that joined the Israelite nation and worshiped God. But it was a removal of the worship of false gods and a removal of evil practices, so that this new nation God was founding, where he was to be their king, so that they could be holy and set apart to God and not have that same brokenness and evil. So they were to make sure they got rid of all of that from the land, but they didn't. They still had other nations living among them, and their hearts, and like Joshua gave them the warning that if they didn't do that, their hearts would be turned after these false gods. And that's what we see happen. So in Judges 2, let's see, verses 2-4 says, "For your part, you were not to make any covenants with the people living in this land. Instead, you were to destroy their altars, but you disobeyed my command. Why did you do this? So now I declare that I will no longer drive out the people living in your land. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a constant temptation to you." So God let them face the consequences of their action. They had allowed these false gods, these nations, to stay in their midst. Their hearts were turned towards them. And where God was like, okay, before I was going to be with you, helping you drive out from the land. But since you haven't done it, now I'm not going to let you. You chose to let them live among you, and now you're going to face the consequences of that. And it's going to be like a thorn in your side where you're tempted to go after the wrong thing. So Israel, in the book of Judges, continually breaks the covenant. It gets to the point where they're not following the law of God anymore. They're not looking to God as their king. But in the book of Judges, God raises up people to rescue them. And there's a pattern here, and I'll show you what it is. So Judges 2, starting in verse 10, says, "After that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight and served the images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them. And they angered the Lord. They abandoned the Lord to serve Baal and the images of Ashtoreth. This made the Lord burn with anger against Israel, so he handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to the enemies all around, and they were no longer able to resist them. Every time Israel went out to battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be defeated, just as he had warned. And the people were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands." So this is the pattern that happens over and over and over again through the book of Judges. Okay, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They serve and worship false gods. And Judges is full of examples of the evil things that they do. Okay, then the Lord is just, he is holy, okay, and he gets rid of sin. He judges sin. So they face the consequences of embracing sin, even though they know what they should do. He's given them the law. They know what they should do. They face consequences. These nations that they should have driven out and didn't, the Lord lets them come in and he doesn't help them. It says he even fights against them. Then they would cry out to the Lord for help. And every time the Lord would hear them, he'd have compassion on them. He still loved them. And he'd raise up a judge to rescue them. Now, some of these judges did practice like judicial authority within the nation of Israel. But the primary role of a judge in the book of Judges was to deliver them from their attackers, from their oppressors. So we would raise up this deliverer. When you hear judge in the book of Judges, think deliverer. Some of them did also do like practical judicial things, but think of like a deliverer, okay? You would raise one up to rescue them, and there would be peace. And then it would start over again. And Judges is this book that's heavy. It is one of the lowest points in the entire Old Testament, if not the lowest point, where we see what happens when God is rejected and when people embrace doing what is right in their own eyes. Now, God raised up judges, imperfect judges. Some did a better job than others, but he used all of them and he rescued his people. You can see, even among the judges, you can see God's grace in the type of people he used. I mean, he used people that were descendants of priests, but he also used someone that, like Gideon, was fearful. And God made him into this mighty warrior and leader. Deborah was a woman who wouldn't have had any authority in that culture, and yet God had her lead a nation. He used Jephthah, which he had some problems, but he was the son of a prostitute who also would have been counted out in that culture. And he was, but God raised him up and used him as a deliverer of his people. I mean, even in God's choice of judges, you can see his grace. You can see how he can use us even when we're imperfect. But what we see over and over and over again, like in chapter 17, verse 6, we see this phrase. Now, in those days, Israel had no king, and the people did what seemed what was right in their own eyes. And this is like the theme of Judges. Israel had no king. God was supposed to be their king. They had no king. The people did what seemed right in their own eyes. Now, the important thing to notice here is it says they did what seemed right. Like, people felt justified in what they were doing. They weren't trying to be like, I want to think of the most evil thing I could do. They were doing what seemed to them like the right thing to do, but it was in their own eyes, not through a filter of what God had showed them was right. And whenever we see this happen in history, in the Bible and beyond, there's devastating consequences. We can see this in the world wars. We can see this in politics. We can see this in our need for social justice. We can see it all over the place. Just look, pull up the news. Open a history book. You can see the consequences of what happens when truth becomes subjective, and when people start doing what's right in their own eyes. The worst dictators in history felt justified in their actions, many times feeling like they had a righteous cause. But what they did was pure evil. And that's the problem when we try to embrace subjective truth. Objective, right? Objective truth is like, these are the facts. Subjective is like where it's open to interpretation. And it's a popular concept. It sounds nice to be like, that's your truth and I'll have my truth and you can have your truth and we'll all live in harmony. The problem is it breaks down because people are sinful and there is concrete truth. There is absolute truth. But we're going to see in Judges, the path the nation of Israel went down, when instead of listening to the law, instead of following God, they embraced a mindset of everyone do what you think is right. and sin reigns and sin grows. And throughout the whole book, we see examples of people worshiping idols, even people who are supposed to be spiritual leaders. We see darkness in thinking and in action, like where it doesn't even make sense, like the line of thinking. There's a part where someone puts a curse on whoever stole money from them, and the son comes and tells the truth, like, hey, I know you put a curse on the person who stole the money. Well, I have it. And the person and the father is like, the Lord will bless you because you told the truth. And now I'm going to have this priest come live in my house and worship idols. It's super weird. It's just this darkness of thinking, this darkness of action where people are just choosing evil all over the place. And we see this nation that was supposed to be good. We see this nation that was supposed to be dedicated. First of all, like their first commandment was love the Lord your God with all your heart, and then love your neighbor as yourself, right? But we're going to see how bad it got when they abandoned that. We're going to read today in Judges 19, and I want to pause real quick to say that the story we're going to read today, we're looking at a hard truth, an important one, but a hard one. And this story is graphic. So if you have children watching with you, I want to encourage you to pause this video and go get them an activity, or slide into the other room to finish watching. You can absolutely talk to your children about the principles found in Judges, about how like God's truth has to be our standard, and about how if we allow like little bits of sin to come in, we allow like little compromises, and like, okay, maybe I can do a little bit of bad here and a little bit of bad here, or maybe in the name of tolerance, I can accept this thing that's not of God. Okay, we're called to love everyone. But like we can teach our children the concept of choosing what's right, founded on a relationship with God. You can teach your children those concepts. But this particular story in Judges that we're going to read, that shows, it's like the climax of the story of Judges to show just how dark the nation had gotten. This story is not appropriate for children. So pause if you need to, and then hit play when you're ready. So we're going to be reading in Judges chapter 19. And I will just be pausing as we go through just to break this down and help you see some things here in this story. So now in those days, Israel had no king. There was a man from the tribe of Levi. Now the Levites were supposed to be the people leading the nation in worship of God. There was a man from the tribe of Levi living in a remote area of the hill country of Ephraim. One day he brought home a woman from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. Now remember, a Jewish man by law should not have had a concubine anyway. A concubine would have been a woman that essentially, like the man has for sex, but she has no rights that a wife would have. She has no legal rights or anything like that. A lot of times kings, like in those days, would have a ton of concubines. And essentially, like they got physical privileges and they were committed to their husband, but they had absolutely like no rights that a wife would have. So she became angry with him and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem. After about 4 months, her husband set out for Bethlehem to speak personally to her and persuade her to come back. He took with him a servant and a pair of donkeys. When he arrived at her father's house, her father saw him and welcomed him. Her father urged him to stay a while, so he stayed 3 days, eating, drinking, and sleeping there. On the 4th day, the man was up early, ready to leave, but the woman's father said to his son-in-law, "Have something to eat before you go." And this goes on where the man over and over like tries to leave, and the father-in-law is like, "Stay a little longer." And it's just showing this hospitality that they should have had in those days. So this father's showing this hospitality, but it's striking how silent and how faceless the woman is in this story. She's referred to as the man's concubine. She's not given a name. And nowhere in this story of like her father and the husband talking, like nowhere is her opinion seen, nowhere is she named. It's really just like the father and the husband kind of talking things out and making decisions. And she just kind of remains intentionally on the part of the writer to show what's happening here. She remains faceless and nameless, okay? And we'll get into that some more. But eventually the man doesn't want to stay any longer, doesn't want his father-in-law's hospitality any longer, is ready to just go home. And he leaves foolishly late in the day. Darkness, remember oftentimes in the Bible, darkness also, when darkness is mentioned, it oftentimes refers to a spiritual state as well as just the natural state of like night was coming. But he leaves near the end of the day as things are getting dark. So it was late in the day when they neared Jebus, and the man's servant said to him, "Let's stop at this Jebusite town and spend the night there." So it's getting dark enough that they need to stop and stay the night. This husband would have known when he left, because of the time of day he left, he would have known he was going to have to stay the night somewhere. But no, his master said, "We can't stay in this foreign town where there are no Israelites." So notice there's a foreign town with no Israelites in the Israelite nation. That shouldn't be, okay? Then instead, we'll go on to Gibeah. So in theory, they're going to an Israelite town to find somewhere safer, to find somewhere where they would find brothers. Come on, let's try to get as far as Gibeah or Ramah, so we'll spend the night in one of those towns. So they went on. The sun was setting as they came to Gibeah, a town in the land of Benjamin. So this isn't like a town on the outskirts. And something really bad is going to happen here. And it's important to notice that this is happening in the heart of the nation. This isn't happening like on this fringe town that's like near where there's like idol worship and stuff happening. No, it's showing that like the idol worship, the evil practices of the nations around them have completely invaded the country. Completely. So they came to Gibeah, a town of Benjamin, so they stopped there to spend the night. They rested in the town square, but no one took them in for the night, which hospitality should have looked like what you saw with the father-in-law. Like culturally, this would have been really weird. Like it shouldn't have been this way. So no one took them in for the night. That evening, an old man came from his work in the fields. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, but he was living in Gibeah, where the people were from the tribe of Benjamin. So he's a foreigner here. He doesn't live here. He's just set up temporary residence here, okay? But he's been there long enough to know what the city's like. When he saw the travelers sitting in the town square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. "We have been in Bethlehem in Judah," the man replied. "We are on our way to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, which is my home. I traveled from Bethlehem and now I'm returning home." Remember, still no notice of the woman here. "But no one has taken us in for the night. Even though we have food, we have everything we need. We have straw and feed for our donkeys and plenty of bread and wine for ourselves." "You're welcome to stay with me," the old man said. "I will give you anything you might need. But whatever you do, don't spend the night in the square." Why would it have been unsafe? In the nation we just saw in Joshua, this nation committed wholeheartedly to serving the Lord. Why would it be unsafe to spend the night in the town square? So he took them home with them and fed the donkeys. After they washed their feet, they ate and drank together. While they were enjoying themselves, a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house. They began beating at the door and shouting to the old man, "Bring out the man who is staying with you so we can have sex with him." Now, this should be striking to the reader, especially to the Old Testament reader here, because just before in Genesis, there were cities named Sodom and Gomorrah that were so evil that they were destroyed. And the story we see is two men of God, in a home with the men of the city surrounding the home saying, send them out so we can have sex with them. This should be strikingly similar to Sodom and Gomorrah, which were these evil, pagan, idol-worshiping cities that did just detestable, evil things. And now the same thing is happening in Israel, which committed to be a nation that followed the Lord. Okay, so there's a striking similarity to these stories. The old man stepped outside to talk to them. No, my brothers, don't do such an evil thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. Okay, that's true. But then look at this, like just the darkened thinking. Look at even this man who took them in. This is what it looks like when everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. Okay. He says, here, take my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. I will bring them out to you and you can abuse them and do whatever you like, but don't do such a shameful thing to this man. So somehow in this man's thinking, what seemed right was it was better to put out these two women, including his own daughter, in order to protect his honor of the standard of hospitality as a host. Like it doesn't make sense. Okay. But he's doing what's right in his own eyes. But they wouldn't listen to him. So the Levite took hold of his concubine and pushed her out the door. The men of the town abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. Finally, at dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman returned to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. So this poor, still nameless woman is so weak she can't even knock at the door. Her husband presumably was fine to sleep and stay there for the night. When her husband opened the door to leave, so he doesn't open the door till he's like ready to continue the journey, there lay his concubine with her hands on the threshold. He said, as if like there's no guilt in what happened, he says, get up, let's go. But there was no answer. So he put her body on his donkey and took her home. When he got home, he took a knife and cut his concubine's body into 12 pieces. Then he sent one piece to each tribe throughout the territory of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, such a horrible crime has not been committed in all the time since Israel left Egypt. And not since, notice they don't say since God brought Israel out of Egypt, like it's usually said. They say since Israel came out of Egypt. Think about it. What are we going to do? Who's going to speak up? So there's finally this wake-up call where Israel realizes how bad things have gotten. But this man, when he sees what has happened, when he sees the evil that has happened, he's trying to do what's right in his own eyes. He's trying to recognize something needs to be done. But he, seemingly with no compassion, no sadness or emotion to be seen, cuts up this poor woman. And somehow to try to fix it, sends a piece to all the tribes of her to show what happened. Like, what darkened thinking. How about let's return to the Lord because things have gotten so dark. But that's not what happens. They realize that it's gotten dark. And then the Levite man, who remember should have been a leader in worship, he lies in trying to unite people to move towards justice. He gathers the nations together, the tribes together, and he says, my concubine and I came to spend the night in Gibeah, a town that belongs to the people of Benjamin. That night, some of the leading citizens of Gibeah surrounded the house, planning to kill me, and then raped my concubine until she was dead. And he says, now you must decide, like, what are we going to do about this? So he completely leaves out any personal responsibility, leaves out the fact that he pushes her out the door. He says that the people were surrounding the house trying to kill him. Like, there's lies all through this. And then all the tribes come together and say, do you know what, we're going to go out and like punish these men. And they go down to Gibeah and say, give us these men. And they say no. So they go to war with them. So now there's war in Israel. And in the process of 3 days of war, there's 40,000 Israelites that die. And there's 25,000 of the tribe of Benjamin that die. So all of these men who should have been brothers end up killing each other, right? And they kill 25,000 men of Benjamin, and because they wouldn't give up the men from the city that had done the crimes. Then, while they are like at battle with them, they kill all of the women and children in the city. And they reduce the tribe of Benjamin down to 600 men. The entire tribe is down to 600 men. Then they come to their senses and they realize, see, this is just them doing what's right in their own eyes, right? They're trying to do but without the Lord. And they say okay, now we almost destroyed one of the tribes and they can't keep going on. There's 600 men. We didn't leave any women. We just almost destroyed one of the 12 tribes of Israel. What do we do? And so there was one town that didn't join in the battle. So they go and destroy that town, the men, and all the women who were not virgins and children, destroy that whole town, take the 400 women from that town that were virgins and give them as wives to the tribe of Benjamin so that they could continue to exist as a tribe. And then there's still 200 of them without wives. So the counsel they give them, and they're like, this will work. You won't be guilty of it. You won't be guilty because this is what we need to do. They tell the last 200 that when the women come out of a certain town to celebrate a festival with dancing, to kidnap them and take them as wives. And they're like, great, we've saved the tribe of Benjamin. And the book of Judges ends with, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did what seemed right in their own eyes. And through the book of Judges, we see God, when the people cry out to him, he raises up a judge, he rescues them, and they fall right back into this until they get to this darkest point. And by the time they wake up and realize how evil things have gotten, they don't, they try to come to their own solution, and it just ends in bloodshed and war and death. But without God as their leader, and without his law as their standard for good, truth was completely subjective. You see the way women were treated, where you see God, when he created woman, said it was good. Said that she was taken from man, and man was to nurture her as himself was to take care of her. And in the curse in the garden, when we see when sin entered the world, it said that the woman's desire would be for her husband, but he would rule over her. And we see that coming into play with so much darkness here. Where the picture of marriage is supposed to be like Christ in the church, where he laid down his life for the church. The New Testament talks about how the husband is supposed to love his wife like Christ loved the church. We should see this way of just serving and love. But instead, we see women like property, faceless, nameless, abused. In this story, we see them killed, we see them kidnapped, we see them raped. And that's the value they were being seen as, somehow within the nation of God. It's heartbreaking, and it's stomach turning. But this is the danger of everyone just choosing what seems right. This is the danger where God told them, don't let sin in the nation. Don't compromise. Don't give your heart to other gods. It's going to turn you away. You're going to allow darkness to come in. The sin's going to spread, and sin brings death. It brings darkened thinking. And we can see that all around us. Like I said, open a history book. Pull up the news on your phone. You can see the darkness. You can see the darkened thinking. You can see what happens when people do what's right in their own eyes. But there is hope. Because while each of the deliverers, each of the judges that God raised up to deliver Israel, each of them brought temporary peace, temporary deliverance. But there is hope because Jesus was coming. And Jesus could deliver us where the deliverers and judges could deliver them from oppressors. They couldn't deliver them from the sin within them. But when Jesus came, he delivered us from sin. He can rip out that root of sin that corrupts everything, that leads us towards darkness, that leads us towards the things we know we shouldn't do, that leads our hearts towards bitterness and anger and compromise. He can take that out and remove it. And it's permanent. He's a permanent deliverer. He can give us true freedom from sin, no matter what we've done. We just like the people in the book of Judges, we need God, and we need to be able to stand on His word as our source of truth. Bold truth, right, church? We believe in God's word as truth, and we're courageous enough to speak it as truth. In love, we're called to love everyone. But in love, never compromise the truth, thinking you're loving someone. Always speak truth out of a heart of love. Don't ever let sin in the name of love, saying, I love this person, so I'm going to allow their beliefs that are sinful and that could turn me from God. I'm going to allow that in because I love this person. No, you love the person, but you're set apart for God. Don't compromise. Let's pray together. Father, the book of Judges is hard. Every time I read it, it's hard. It's heartbreaking, and it's difficult to even read it. But God, thank you for having it recorded as a picture and as a reminder of what happens when subjective truth is embraced instead of your truth. What happens when everyone's allowed to do what's right in their own eyes. God, thank you that you've given us a concrete foundation of truth to stand on. Help us to walk in it. Give us wisdom in how to walk in it well. Thank you for the deliverer you've given to us in Jesus. Thank you for loving us to rescue us even while we were still sinners, even while we were still turned against you. You loved us enough to rescue us. Thank you. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Church, if you have questions, write them down, bring them to your community groups and this week, and we're going to have more conversation about it. If you're not part of a group, click on the link, let us know. We'll get you connected in with a group, and we'll talk more this week about subjective truth. We'll talk more about how Jesus can forgive us no matter what we've done, how He can be our deliverer, and the beauty and the hope that's available, and how to live as Christians even in a world that in many ways does embrace subjective truth. We're praying for you. We're here to walk with you. We'll see you in groups this week. Have a great week.